The first time I said no to my family and actually meant it, my brother told me I would regret it for the rest of my life. That was 4 years ago. I have not regretted it for a single day since. And I want to tell you the whole story, and then you can decide for yourself whether I am the coldest woman in Pennsylvania or just the first person in that family who ever bothered to read the fine print. My name is Rachel. I am 43 years old. I am a bookkeeper, which is going to matter more than you'd think. And I grew up the second of 2 children in a tidy brick house outside Allentown, in a family that ran, like a lot of families do, on a quiet arithmetic that nobody ever wrote down, but everybody could feel. In that arithmetic, my brother Greg was the asset, and I was the liability. He was 3 years older, and he was the golden child in the truest, most textbook sense of that word. And I was the other thing. The one every golden child needs in order to exist, which is the scapegoat. If you grew up as the scapegoat, you already know exactly what I mean, and you probably felt your shoulders climb toward your ears just now. And I'm sorry. If you didn't, let me try to explain it, because it is not the same as just being the less favored kid. It is a job. The scapegoat is the child a struggling family assigns all of its badness to, so that everyone else can feel like the good ones. Whatever went wrong, I had done it. If the milk went bad, I had left it out. If Greg failed a test, I had distracted him. If our parents fought, it was the stress I put them under. I was, from about the age of 5, the reason, the designated reason for whatever was wrong on a given day, and my brother was the son the whole house turned to face. I could give you 100 examples, but I'll give you 3, and then I'll move on, because I promised you a story and not a complaint. When I was 9, I wanted braces, because my teeth were genuinely crooked, and I was told there was no money. That same year, Greg got a car. A used one, but a car, at 16, that nobody had asked him to chip in for. I paid for my own braces at 26, out of my first real paychecks, and I remember the orthodontist gently asking why I'd waited so long, and I didn't have an answer I could say out loud in a nice office. When I was 14, I made the honor roll, and I brought the letter home so proud my hands were shaking, and my mother looked at it and said, "That's nice," and then spent 20 minutes on the phone telling my aunt that Greg had scored a goal in a game that didn't matter. And the phrase that ran under my entire childhood like a river under a town was, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" I heard it so many times that it stopped being words and became a kind of weather. Why can't you be more like your brother? I could recite it in my mother's exact cadence right now. 4 years, no contact, and it would raise the hair on my arms. The third example is the one that matters most, so hold on to it. I was the one who noticed things. I was the one who kept track. In a family that ran on a story everyone agreed to tell, I was cursed with a memory for what had actually happened. And that, it turns out, is the least forgivable thing a scapegoat can be. Greg could rewrite any afternoon by dinner time, and my mother would believe the rewrite. And I would sit there holding the real version like a receipt nobody wanted, and slowly learn that being right and being believed are 2 completely different things, and that in my family, I would only ever get the first one. I did what a lot of us do. I got out as soon as I could. I built a life 3 hours away in Pittsburgh, and I got very, very good at a job that is, when you think about it, the perfect job for someone raised to remember what really happened. I keep the books. I reconcile the accounts. I am the person who can tell you to the cent where the money actually went, no matter what story is being told about it. My whole career is built on the one skill my childhood beat into me, which is that the paper does not lie, and the paper does not care whose feelings it hurts. And if you keep good enough records, then one day, when it counts, you will not need anyone to believe you. You will simply be able to show them. Let me tell you about the life they would later ask me so casually to set on fire, because it matters. By the time Greg called, I had built something in Pittsburgh that was mine down to the studs. I had a job I was good at, with people who valued the exact thing my family had punished me for: my memory, my care, my refusal to let a number quietly slide. I had a little house with a garden I'd put in with my own hands, and a Sunday routine, and a partner named Nick who had been with me 6 years, and who loved me in the plain, undramatic way I had long ago stopped believing was available to a person like me. Nick had watched me untangle 40 years of being the family villain, session by patient session, and he had never once suggested I owed those people access to the woman I'd finally become. That was the life on the table. Not nothing, not a placeholder. A whole, quiet, good life that had cost me everything to build. And they wanted me to bulldoze it because I was the one whose life they had never once bothered to see? For a long time, I stayed in contact, because that is what you're supposed to do, and because hope is a stubborn animal. I called on holidays. I drove home for Christmas and let my sister-in-law's comments roll off me, and watched my mother light up at Greg and go flat at me. And I told myself this was just how families were, that everybody's got something, that at least we weren't screaming at each other. I went to therapy, eventually, the way a lot of us eventually do, and my therapist listened to me describe a typical Sunday dinner for about 3 sessions, and then asked me a question that took me a year to answer. She asked, "What are you actually getting from this relationship? Not what are you giving? What are you getting?" And I sat there, 40 years old, and could not name a single thing. The thing that finally did it, that turned the slow leak into a clean break, was not dramatic, and I think that surprises people. There was no screaming match, no thrown plate. It was a birthday, my 40th. Greg's wife was throwing him a big party for his 43rd that same month, and my mother spent our one phone call that week talking about the caterer for Greg's party. And when I said, a little carefully, that I was turning 40 on Thursday, and thought maybe we could do something, there was this pause. And then my mother said, "Oh, we're just so busy with Greg's thing. Maybe we'll do a dinner for you sometime in the spring." Sometime. In the spring. And something in me that had been holding a rope for 35 years just quietly let go. I didn't yell. I just realized, with a calm that frightened me a little, that I had been auditioning my whole life for a part that had never once been available, and that I could stop now, and that stopping was allowed. So I stopped. I want to be precise about what going no contact actually looked like, because people imagine it as a big cinematic renunciation, and it is nothing like that. It was quiet and it was administrative, which is very me. I didn't send a furious letter. I just stopped initiating. Stopped driving 3 hours to be a prop at Greg's holidays. Stopped picking up when the calls were only ever to talk about him. When my mother did call, I was polite and brief, and I did not take the bait. And eventually the calls thinned out, because it turns out a scapegoat who won't play the part is not very interesting to the people who cast her. Within a year, the contact was essentially gone. And the family story, the one they told the aunts and the cousins and the whole extended web, was not that Rachel had finally set a boundary after a lifetime of being the family's designated failure. The story was that Rachel, cold and ungrateful, had abandoned her family for no reason at all. My Aunt Nancy actually called me once in that first year to tell me so. She was my mother's younger sister, and she'd always been kind to me in a distant sort of way. And she called, clearly having been deployed, to tell me that I was breaking my mother's heart. That family is family, and that she never thought she'd see the day I turned out so cold and heartless. I remember standing in my kitchen in Pittsburgh, holding the phone, and choosing not to defend myself. Because I had finally learned a thing that took me 40 years, which is that you cannot win an argument with someone who is committed to a story about you. So I just said, "I'm sorry you feel that way, Aunt Nancy, and I hope you're well." And I got off the phone, and I cried for about 10 minutes. And then I made dinner. Hold on to Aunt Nancy too. She comes back. I don't want to make going no contact sound like a clean victory, because it wasn't. And anyone who has actually done it will tell you the very same thing. It is a grief. You are not walking away from monsters in a movie. You are walking away from your mother, your brother, the only family you were ever issued. And you do it knowing you'll miss the good moments too. The rare Sunday when everyone happened to be kind. The version of them you kept hoping was the real one under all the rest. For the first year, I grieved people who were still alive, which is a particular ache with no funeral and no casserole and no card. I second-guessed myself constantly. The only thing that kept me from crawling back was a question my therapist had taught me to ask. And it was not, "Are they family?" Because of course they were. It was a harder one. Would I accept this treatment from a friend? And the answer, every single time, was no. Not for one day. So why, she asked, was I accepting it just because we happened to share a last name? Here is the part that people find hard to understand. And it is the part that makes me, I think, not the villain of this story, though you're free to disagree. I never stopped loving my mother. Going no contact was not the end of love. It was the end of access. I had learned, finally, that I could love someone and still not hand them the keys to me. That a boundary is not a punishment you inflict on another person. It is a wall you build around the part of yourself that can't survive any more weather. And behind that wall, quietly, without telling a soul, I kept doing something that I have never once mentioned to my family, and that only my partner Nick and my own meticulous records knew about. I kept helping. With money. Anonymously, more or less, and consistently. For the entire 4 years I was supposedly the daughter who had abandoned her family. Let me explain, because this is where the bookkeeper in me becomes the whole point. My parents were not wealthy, and after my father passed, my mother was on a fixed income in that same tidy brick house. And the house, like all houses, kept needing things. And I found that I could not, in my own conscience, let my mother's roof leak just because her heart had chosen Greg. So when I heard, through the one cousin who still talked to me, that the roof was failing, I called the roofer myself, privately, and I paid for it. $11,000. I asked him to tell her he'd found a warranty that covered it, and he thought that was a little strange, but he cashed the check. When the furnace died 2 winters ago, I paid for that too, $6,000. Same arrangement, a fictional rebate. And every single month, for 4 years, I quietly covered the gap in my mother's prescription costs, a little over $300 a month, routed through that same cousin so that it looked like it came from a charity program that did not, in fact, exist. I did not do this to build a case. I want to be clear about that, because of what happens next. I did it because she was my mother, and I loved her, and I could. And because the wall I'd built was to protect me, not to punish her. But I am a bookkeeper, and a bookkeeper does not know how to spend money without recording it. It is not in me. So every check, every transfer, every arrangement went into a folder, the way everything in my life goes into a folder, with dates and amounts and confirmations. Not because I ever planned to use it, but because keeping the receipt is simply the shape my hands make. The cousin, by the way, was my cousin Steph, my Aunt Nancy's daughter, a few years younger than me, and she was the one thread in that family that never snapped. Steph had always thought the way they treated me was wrong. Had thought so since we were kids at that same kitchen table. And she was the one who quietly fed me the information I needed to keep helping from behind the wall. The failing roof, the dead furnace, the pharmacy bills my mother was skipping doses to afford. She never told a soul. She just called me when something was wrong at the brick house, and I would handle it in the dark. And the two of us ran a tiny, private conspiracy of decency for 4 years, while the rest of the family narrated my heartlessness to the aunts. Every scapegoat needs one person who saw it clearly. Steph was mine, long before her own mother ever came around. For 4 years, while my family told the aunts that I had abandoned my sick mother, I was quietly paying to keep her warm and dry and medicated, and filing the proof of it in a drawer, and telling no one. Because the whole point of the wall was that I no longer needed them to know I was good. I knew. The paper knew. That had finally become enough. And then, on a Tuesday last spring, after nearly 2 years of near silence, my brother Greg called me. And I knew, the way you know, that something had changed, because Greg did not call me. Greg had not dialed my number in years. I looked at his name on my phone for 3 full rings, and I felt that old childhood weather move across my chest. And then I answered it, calm, the way 4 years of quiet had taught me to be. And Greg, without so much as a hello, without one word about the years, said, "Mom's sick. It's bad. We need to talk about what you're going to do." What I was going to do. Not, would you be willing? Not, we could really use your help. What I was going to do, as if it had already been decided in a meeting I hadn't been invited to. Which, it turned out, it had. My mother, he explained in the clipped tone of a man reading me my assignment, had been declining for a while, memory and mobility both, and had reached the point of needing full-time care. And the family, meaning Greg and his wife and, I'd later learn, a couple of the aunts, had discussed it and arrived at the obvious solution. I would leave my job in Pittsburgh, give up my apartment, and move back into the brick house to become my mother's live-in caregiver. Full-time. Unpaid, of course. Because, and here is the sentence, here is the whole 38 years of my life in one sentence. Because you're the one without kids. You don't have anything tying you down. It just makes sense. And I want to say something about that phrase, the one without kids, because they used it like a key that unlocked my whole life for their use. I don't have children, and that was a choice, made clearly and without regret, alongside a partner who chose it with me. My life is not an empty room standing ready to be filled with other people's emergencies. It is full of work and love and friends and a garden and a hard-won quiet. And the assumption underneath their entire plan, the assumption I had swallowed without tasting it for 30 years, was that a woman without children has no life of her own worth protecting, that her time is a commons, free for the family to graze whenever they run short. That was the belief I finally refused. Not having kids never made me the obvious sacrifice. It only made me the one they figured they could get away with asking. I want you to sit with the sheer completeness of it, because I did, standing in my kitchen with the phone against my ear. The same kitchen where Aunt Nancy had called me heartless. For 30 years, I had been the family's designated failure, the one who wasn't as good as her brother, the one whose achievements went flat, and whose birthday could wait until spring. I had been so worthless to them that they'd told the whole family I'd abandoned them. And now, in the first moment that they needed something enormous, something that would cost a person their entire independent life, they had turned to that same worthless daughter, without apology, without acknowledgement, without so much as a crack in the story, and simply informed her that her life was the one that didn't count enough to keep. And the thing is, the old me, the 9-year-old who wanted braces, would have said yes. That's what they were counting on. They were counting on 30 years of training, on a woman so hungry to finally be useful, finally be chosen, that she would burn her whole life down for the chance. They did not know that woman had moved out 4 years ago and wasn't coming back. So I said no. I said it kindly, and I said it once, which is a thing I had learned in 4 years of quiet, that you do not owe anyone the 10th explanation, or the 5th, or even the 2nd, and that a no, which comes with a paragraph of justification, is really just an invitation to negotiate. I did not give him a paragraph. I said, "Greg, I'm so sorry Mom is going through this, and I love her, and I will help. But I am not going to quit my job and give up my home and my life to become an unpaid live-in nurse. That's not something I can do. I'm happy to talk about how I can help in other ways." There was a silence, and then the weather came, the full storm of it, 30 years of it. He told me I was unbelievable. He told me this was our mother, and after everything she did for me, I was really going to be this selfish. He said, "You're the one without kids, Rachel. What do you even have going on that's so important?" And there it was again, the whole appraisal of my life in one lazy question. My career, and my home, and my quiet, hard-won peace, all of it weighed and found to be nothing. Because it did not include the thing that in their eyes made a woman's time worth protecting. He told me the family already knew I'd abandoned Mom, and that this just proved it. And at the end, when none of it moved me, he said the thing that told me everything about what they'd actually come for. He said, "Fine, if you won't step up, then you can at least pay for it. We'll talk about that when you come." I noticed the pivot. Of course I noticed it. I noticed pivots for a living. In the space of one phone call, he had gone from "we need you to move home for free" to "you can at least pay for it," which meant that what they wanted from me had never really been my hands or my heart. It was my usefulness, in whatever form they could extract it. And if they couldn't have my life, they'd take my checkbook. And either way, the story would stay the same. The story where I was the one who owed, and never the one who was owed. I told them I would come home. Once. Not to move in, but to see Mom, and to talk, in person, like adults. And I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen for a long time. And my partner, Nick, who had watched my face during that call, came and stood next to me and said, "You don't have to go." And I said, "I know." I said, "I'm not going for them. I'm going for her. Because I don't know how much time is left. And I'm going for me. Because I want to say this to their faces one time in my life. And I'm going to bring the folder." Nick knew about the folder. Nick was the only one who did. He looked at me for a second and he said, "Are you going to use it?" And I said, "Honestly, I hope I don't have to. I hope I get to keep it closed." But I'm not walking in there defenseless one more time. And that was the truth. I did not drive to Allentown planning a reveal. I drove there hoping, the way I had hoped my whole childhood, that this time they might just be decent. And knowing, the way I had learned as an adult, to bring the paperwork in case they weren't. I drove out the following Saturday, 3 hours east across the state. The same drive I'd made 100 times as the good daughter trying to earn a seat. Except this time, I wasn't trying to earn anything, and the difference in my chest was enormous. I pulled up to the brick house, and it looked smaller than it lived in my memory, the way these houses do. And I sat in the car for a minute, and then I went in, because whatever else was about to happen, my mother was in there, and I had not seen her in a long time. Seeing her is the part I have to slow down for, because it is the part that keeps this from being a story about winning. She was in the front room in a recliner that was new since my time, and she was small, so much smaller than the woman who had run the arithmetic of my childhood. And when she looked up at me, there was a beat, a terrible open beat, where I couldn't tell if she knew me. Then she smiled, and she said my name, Rachel, in a voice that was genuinely glad, and for one cruel and beautiful second, I got the greeting I had wanted my entire life. Before I understood that it came from a mind that had been loosened from its old grievances by the same disease that was taking everything else. She had forgotten to be disappointed in me. The illness had quietly erased the very story I'd spent 40 years failing to escape. And now that it was gone, she was just an old woman glad her daughter had come. And I was just a daughter, and it was the closest we would ever be. And it was built on the fact that she no longer entirely remembered who I was supposed to be. I sat with her for an hour before anyone talked business. She drifted. She called me by her own sister's name once, and then found me again. She told me a long story about a neighbor I didn't recognize, and I held her hand, which was papery and cool. And I thought about the $11,000 roof over both our heads, and the fact that she would never know it was mine. And I found, to my surprise, that I didn't need her to. The wall I'd built 4 years ago was holding, and from behind it, safe, I discovered I could love her freely. This diminished and gentled version of the woman who had hurt me, precisely because she could no longer reach the part of me that used to break. That is a strange grace, and I don't fully understand it, but I'll take it. There was one moment with her that afternoon that I will carry the rest of my life. She was lucid for a little while, the fog lifting the way it does in that illness, unpredictable and precious. and she looked at me and asked, out of nowhere, "Are you happy, Rachel?" Just that. Are you happy? She had never asked me that in 43 years. Not once. Not when it would have mattered. Not when I was 9 or 19 or 30. And here it was, arriving decades late from a mind that no longer kept the old ledger. And I said, "Yes, Mom, I am. I really am." And she nodded and patted my hand and said, "Good. That's all I ever wanted for you." Which was not remotely true of the mother who had raised me, and was, somehow, entirely true of the woman sitting in front of me now. I decided to believe the woman in front of me. It was a gift I gave myself, and I let her mean it. Then Greg got home with his wife Jen, and my Aunt Nancy was there too, and we ended up around the kitchen table, the same table, and I felt the whole architecture of my childhood reassemble itself in the seating. And Greg, who had clearly appointed himself chairman, laid out the plan again as though the phone call had been a rough draft, and this was the vote. I would take a leave or quit outright and be moved into the back bedroom by the end of the month. He'd actually looked at the logistics. He had not looked at me at all. I let him finish because I am not the interrupting kind, and then I said, calmly, the same thing I'd said on the phone. "No, I'm not moving home. I love Mom, and I'll help, but not like that. Not by dissolving my entire life, and I need all of you to hear the no, because it isn't a door I'm leaving open a crack. It's just no." And that is when Greg reached for the money, right on schedule. He leaned back and he did the thing, the ugly little performance, where he said, "Well, isn't that convenient? The big shot bookkeeper in Pittsburgh is too busy and too important to lift a finger for the woman who raised her. So I guess the least you can do, since you clearly won't do anything else, is write a check." He named a number. He said, "Care costs money, and you've got money, and no kids, and no heart. So you can at least open your wallet, even if you won't open your calendar." He said, "Put your money where your mouth is for once in your life, Rachel." And Jen nodded, and Aunt Nancy looked at her hands, and my mother, God bless her, was somewhere else entirely, humming, "Put your money where your mouth is, for once in my life." So I opened the folder. I did it quietly. I want you to understand the tone, because the tone is the whole thing. And if I tell it wrong, it becomes a different, uglier story than the one that actually happened. I did not slam it down. I did not stand up and point. I set it on the table, this plain manila folder I'd carried in from the car, and I opened it, and I turned it around so they could read it. And I said, in the flattest, most bookkeeper voice I have, "I actually already do. I have for 4 years. I just never told you, because I didn't do it for credit. But since you've asked me to put it on the table, here it is." And then I walked them through it, the way I'd walk a client through a reconciliation. Page by page, no drama, just numbers and dates. The roof, $11,000, this date, here's the invoice, here's the clear check, and yes, the warranty story was a fiction. There was no warranty. There was me. The furnace, 2 winters ago, $6,000, same thing. There was no rebate. The prescriptions, a little over $300 every month for 40-some months, routed so it looked like a charity, so that Mom would never feel like she was taking from the daughter she was ashamed of. I added it up out loud, because that is what you do at the bottom of a column. And the number was a little over $30,000. And when I said it, the kitchen went so quiet I could hear my mother humming in the other room. Greg's face did something I had waited 30 years to see, and I am here to tell you that it gave me no pleasure, and that surprised me more than anything. Because I had imagined this moment, in weaker years, as a triumph, a mic drop, the scapegoat vindicated at last. And when it actually came, sitting at that table, watching my brother realize that the sister he'd called a deadbeat had quietly been the one keeping the lights on, I did not feel like I'd won. I felt tired, and I felt sad, and mostly, I felt done, which is a different and better feeling than winning. I closed the folder. I did not read them the part of me that wanted to say, "And where were you?" And I didn't itemize Greg's failures the way I could have, because I had not driven 3 hours to destroy my brother. And standing on his neck would not have given me back 1 day of my childhood. I just said, quietly, I didn't show you this to win anything. I showed you because for 4 years, this family has told everyone that I abandoned my mother. And that was never true. And I think I was owed exactly 1 afternoon where the truth was on the table. That's all. You can keep the story you like after I leave. But now, at least one of us has seen the real one. Then I told them what I would actually do, because a boundary without an offer is just a wall. And I wasn't there to punish my mother for her children's failures. I said I would keep contributing to her care, a set amount monthly, on my terms, in writing, through the proper channels, like an adult, not extracted by guilt at a kitchen table. I said I would be reachable for medical decisions and that I would come see her, on my own schedule, because I loved her. But I would not be moving home, and I would not be handing anyone a blank check to make a lifetime of resentment feel resolved. And no was going to keep being a complete sentence, no matter how many times they made me say it. And then I kissed my mother goodbye, and she called me a good girl, which she had never once said to me when it would have cost her something. And I took it anyway, because I have made my peace with getting the right words from the wrong moment. And I drove home to Pittsburgh, and I slept for 11 hours. Here is what happened after, the part I only know because of the one cousin who still talks to me, and it is the part that taught me the most. With me off the table as free labor and unlimited money, the family had to do the thing they had spent my whole life avoiding, which was solve their own problem like grown people. And it turned out they could. Greg, who had spent 30 years being told he was too special to be responsible for anything, hired a professional aide for our mother. Paid, trained, insured, there 5 days a week, out of his own pocket for the first time in his entire life. My mother, by every account, is better cared for by that steady, kind, unrelated professional than she would ever have been by a resentful daughter conscripted into martyrdom. Because the aide gets to go home at night and refill her own tank, and love that has to run 24 hours a day on an empty tank curdles into something that helps no one. My saying no did not abandon my mother. My saying no is the reason a qualified person is holding her hand on the days I can't. And Greg, I'm told, is different now, in small ways. Not transformed. People don't transform, but chastened. A man who has to write the check himself every month for the thing he assumed his sister would handle for free learns something about the weight of what he used to hand off without a glance. It is not my job to rehabilitate my brother, and I'm not holding my breath, but I'll allow that a real consequence did more for him in 1 year than 40 years of my silent absorbing ever did. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the family sponge. All those years I soaked up the mess to keep the peace. I wasn't fixing anything. I was just letting everyone else stay exactly as they were. But the update I actually keep, the one that undid me, came about a year after that afternoon at the table, and it came from Aunt Nancy. The same Aunt Nancy who had called me heartless in my own kitchen 4 years before. She called again, and I braced for round 2, and instead there was a long pause. And then my aunt, who is 71 years old, and from a generation that does not say these things, said, "Rachel, I owe you an apology, and I have owed it for a while." She said she had watched the whole thing, the way the family had turned on me, and then turned right around and tried to conscript me. And somewhere in there, she had started to see the arithmetic she'd been part of her whole life, and she didn't like what she saw. She said, "You weren't cold. You were the only one being honest, and we punished you for it. And I'm sorry I was one of the ones holding the whip." She said, "You were right to protect yourself. I wish I'd learned it at your age, instead of watching you learn it the hard way." I did not gloat about that either. I just cried. Again, the way I had 4 years earlier in that same kitchen. Except these were a different kind of tears. The kind you cry when one person from the old world crosses the line and stands next to you, and you realize how long you'd been standing there alone. One person. That's all it takes sometimes to make the whole exile survivable. Aunt Nancy and I talk now, actually. She's the family I chose out of the family I was given, which turns out to be a thing you're allowed to do. So that is the story, and here is where I have to hand it to you, because the title of it, the question my family still asks the aunts and cousins to this day, is whether I'm the villain. Whether a daughter who goes no contact and then refuses to quit her job and move home when her mother gets sick is a monster, cold and ungrateful, no matter what she was quietly paying for behind the scenes. Some of my family will go to their graves certain that I am. And I have made my peace with that, because I finally understand the one thing that took me 43 years to learn, which is that you cannot set yourself on fire to keep other people warm and then expect them to thank you for the light. I loved my mother. I still do. I just stopped being willing to disappear in order to prove it. I chose myself. After 30 years of being the reason for everything wrong in a house that needed a reason, I finally decided that my one life was not the family's spare part, to be installed wherever a golden child left a gap. And the strangest thing, the thing I did not expect, is that choosing myself did not make me love them less. It just meant that when I helped, and I did help, it came from a free person instead of a hostage. And that turns out to be the only kind of help that doesn't rot. So tell me honestly, because I really do want to know, and I've stopped being afraid of the answer. Was I wrong? Was the no too much? Should a good daughter have moved home no matter the cost? Or is there a point where protecting your own life stops being selfish and starts being survival? Where do you land? And more than that, where's the line for you in your own family? If you've ever been the scapegoat or the golden child, or the one they called when they needed a sponge, I would really like to hear it. So drop it in the comments and tell me your state and your age while you're at it. because I'm always curious who's out there, nodding along in the dark. If this one hits something true, a like helps somebody else who needs to hear it find it, and I'd be honored to have you back for the next one.